Hello, this is Mrs. Kyler, and today we're going to talk about hills like white elephants and everyday use. Two very different stories, but I think they're both very interesting as far as the symbolism of the story, the character development, the setting, and the point of view. So we'll start with hills like white elephants. Hemingway's style of writing is a lot different than any of the other authors that we've actually encountered this semester. Hemingway is a very minimalist style, which means he only uses the minimal amount of information and words that he actually needs to include. So whereas Edgar Allan Poe had very convoluted, complex sentences, Hemingway is very brief. Not only that, but he's emotionally detached. He doesn't get very close to his characters. So it may be difficult for us to really understand what they're thinking. We hear what they're saying, their dialogue, but we don't know what they're really talking about because we can't get into their thoughts. And so we're trying to figure out what is this decision that they're trying to make. And of course, looking through between the lines and understand, oh, there's an operation she's supposed to have. It's going to make everything all better. But once they take it, you can't get it back. They're talking about an abortion. So he's trying to convince her, Jig, to have an abortion. And so we can see all of this through reading between the lines and seeing the symbolism of what they're looking at. When she looks at the one side of the hills, and they're dry and arid, and they look like, she talks about the skin of the hills. All of that gives us suggestions of course, pregnancy and the death, right? The death is the hills, and then she looks at the fertile fields, so we see that decision of between life and death. And Hemingway's code does go along with that. He's a very hyper-masculine code. It's sort of one of detachment, not showing a lot of emotion, not allowing women to get in the way of beautiful adventures, as he says, and embracing nada, embracing the concept that even whatever we do is based on our own code, whether or not there's a reward in the afterlife or not. So we can kind of see some of these elements feeding into his style. As I said before, the point of view is third-person objective, so it's kind of like there's a fly on the wall and it's just reporting what they see and hear. Very detached, very emotionally detached. We don't get into anybody's thoughts or feelings, but Hemingway is pretty clever. So what we do is we look at what the characters are looking at. So when it says Jig looks at, that gives us a clue of what she may be thinking when she looks at the one side where it's dry and not very endured and arid. She's thinking about having an abortion. But when she's looking at the fertile green past hills that are more beautiful on the other side, she's thinking about keeping the baby. When she's looking at the table, she's thinking about the operation table. So you can understand what she's thinking of by what she looks at. Same thing when we go with a man, what he looks at when he's looking at the two train tracks, he's trying to make his decision. There's two paths to go in. When he moves the suitcase from one side to the other, he's actually changing his mind. So the actions and what they're looking at shows us what they could be thinking. Don't trust the dialogue in the story. What people say is very different from what they actually may be thinking. And when someone says, oh, it's okay, you don't have to, even though when they're nagging you to do something, they're probably not saying, oh, you don't have to. They're really saying, you better do it. I just want to give myself an easy out, make myself feel better. And when she says, I'm feeling fine, maybe she is feeling fine, but that's not necessarily the case. So you want to make sure that you're not just judging them by the dialogue, you're actually looking at their actions and what they're looking at more to tell what they're really thinking and feeling. And the setting, of course, is in Spain at a bar by a train station. But like I said, there's a lot of symbolism in the setting. The setting tells us a lot of what they're thinking and feeling. At the end, when the man goes into the bar, he walks away from her and goes into the bar, and he's seeing people that are reasonably waiting for a train. He's trying to find out, should I become one of these reasonable people? Should I take on this bag of responsibility? Should I actually become a father? Do I have it within me? Or should I continue to pursue beautiful adventures like the Hemingway Code says? And the girl, when she steps aside and she's looking at the beautiful green fields and she's thinking, we could have all of this. And she becomes almost like a goddess of creation. She has the power to create. And perhaps the man as some critics have suggested, the man's a little jealous of her for having that power and wants to take that power or agency away from her. So it's interesting to think about what they're looking at and the setting as reflecting what they're really thinking about. It makes you stretch your mind a little bit. So looking at characterization, we have two main characters, the American and Jig, the girl. And so we're trying to figure out which one is the protagonist. Remember, we can tell which one's the protagonist by it's the one that drives the plot, makes a decision, comes to realization, or has a conflict. And so we try to, in order to see which one we want to argue for as the protagonist, we want to see which one is making a decision, which one is coming to realization. And then we also want to consider the types of protagonists. We have the traditional hero, anti-hero, Byronic hero, tragic hero, and Hemingway Code hero. So Hemingway Code hero is the person that's trying to live up to that Hemingway Code, that hyper-masculine code. So I think we could argue that either the American or Jig is the protagonist. The decisions they're trying to make, the American, will I give up a life of wandering and adventures to settle down to get married and have this child with this woman? And the Jig, of course, is trying to say, will I, do what the American is wanting me to do, or will I give up his love, risk losing his love, and go ahead and have the baby, and maybe risk having to have the baby on my own, not having any support. Remember, they're in Spain, and if both of them are if she's from Spain, more than likely no one's going to be gathering around her to take care of her. She would become an outcast at this time in the 1930s. So again, you're trying to think about which one is. And again, I think you could argue that either one of them is, or maybe both of them are. If the American and Jig could both be anti-heroes, they're both flawed, more human, they have human conflicts. The Hemingway Code hero, again, is a hyper-masculine type hero, so I think we could only argue it for the American. Now to talk a little bit about everyday use. Everyday use is one of my favorite stories. It's very interesting with regards to point of view. You have a first-person narrator, Mama, but she tries not to act like a first-person narrator. So yes, she is a first-person narrator, but because she's Mama, she has superpowers. So she's able to try to be objective, right? She looks at herself as she thinks she should look by looking at herself on TV. But then when in comparison, she's able to step outside of herself and look at what she really looks like. I'm really a big, bone, strong woman who is able to do this and that. So she's able to have that objectivity with herself. But there are factors that impact her reliability. One is it's hard to be objective when it comes to your own daughters if you're a mama. So those things impact her reliability, like what she's saying that Dee is like, or what she's saying that Maggie is like. Both of those are impacted by her prejudices, right? Her own biases towards her daughters. Yet she does try to get psychically close to her daughter. She says she thinks she knows what she thinks, that Maggie feels this way. Maggie thinks this. Dee feels this way. She was really happy when the house burned down. So she thinks she knows what both of her daughters are thinking. Again, both of those are impacted by her own experience, her own biases. So you must understand that her reliability may not be fully accurate. But again, she's got this magical, wonderful ability to be able to act like an objective narrator and to act like a third-person, limited sort of narrator. So Mama has a deep conflict. We say, okay, she needs to decide which daughter to give the quilt to. That's obvious. But beyond that, she also has a conflict deciding about who she really is as a person. She's trying to understand, who am I? Am I this woman on TV? No. Am I this big bone woman that can make it on her own? Am I a woman who is come up from, my ancestry is slavery? Or am I a woman whose ancestry actually goes back further, like Dee is trying to show her, back into Africa? Am I empowered? Am I strong enough to do what I need to do? Or am I going to be servile like Maggie? So it could be that looking at both Dee and Maggie are looking at two ways of seeing herself. So different levels of conflict. And her epiphany, of course, is at the end, is when she realizes who she is, comes to realization she has agency, she has power, she has the ability to make her own decision and to empower Maggie as well. So Dee, even though she seems kind of unlikable at sometimes, has actually given her the agency, the power to empower herself and to empower Maggie to raise up from her servile attitude and become more of a strong woman. And so the daughters, Dee could be seen as an antagonist, but also they could be seen as foils. A foil is someone who reflects the main character. So both Maggie and Dee are reflecting Mama. They are kind of like, they might be, if you have a Sherlock Holmes, his foil is Watson. Watson makes Sherlock Holmes look really, really smart. And so we understand something about the main character by looking at Watson. We know that he's brilliant. We know that he's mysterious. We know all of these. He comes to great powers of deduction. So the same thing with Mama and the girls. We know a lot about Mama by looking at Maggie and by looking at Dee.